Now, quickly moving on to our first much looked after workshop for today. Our first speaker is a partner at Pegasus Tech Ventures, a global venture capital firm based out of Silicon Valley that is focused on making strategic investments in high-tech startups and connecting them with the Pegasus network of over 30 corporate limited partners. He has been part of the Pegasus investment team that has invested in over 100 companies, including SpaceX, 23andMe, Bird, and Robinhood. Please welcome Bill Reichert.
Okay. Hey, thank you, RJ. Great to be here. Thank you.
Bill, welcome virtually to the Philippines. Is it a good morning or a good evening to you right now?
Oh, it's good evening. It's late here in Silicon Valley. So yes, no, darkness has settled over Silicon Valley, but tomorrow will be a new day.
And with that, the show is yours, Bill. Thanks so much for joining us here in the Philippines.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And congratulations to you and the Ignite team and to the Philippines for all the progress you guys have made. I really, really wish I were there to be on the ground and being with you in person. But you know, this is the new normal, connecting globally via internet. And I got to say, it has some advantages because I get to spend my day connecting with people all over the planet. Get up early in the morning and I talk to Israel and Europe, and during the day I talk to America, and at night I talk to Korea and Singapore and Philippines. I tell you, it's an amazing world now. It's an amazing world. So thank you so much for having me. It's my delight and honor to be part of this program. And so today what we're going to talk about is innovation. So innovation is one of those topics that we talk about a lot, right? And everybody loves to talk about innovation, but do we really know a lot about what innovation means? What it is that enables us to be successful in innovation? Again, I mean, it's part of every program. It's part of every corporate structure. We're all thinking about it all the time. But what have we learned about what makes for successful innovation? So I've spent most of my career here in Silicon Valley. I spent the first part as an entrepreneur, starting up or restarting or co-founding 4 different software companies, and was very fortunate. 2 of them managed to go public. 2 of them crashed and burned, blew up. But the great thing about Silicon Valley is when you crash and burn, you can pick yourself up and you dust yourself off, and then you spin the story a little bit and you get to do it again. So I've been very fortunate to be here in Silicon Valley. And after my multiple experiences with being an entrepreneur, I crossed over to becoming a venture capitalist. And so for roughly the last 20 years, I've been an investor. So as a venture capital investor, needless to say, we spend a lot of time thinking about what makes for successful innovation. And so I've got some thoughts on the topic that I want to share with you here today. In fact, what we're going to talk about are the top 10 lessons from Silicon Valley on the future of innovation. So let's jump into it. Lesson number one. Lesson number one, it turns out that innovation is not about invention. So, sometimes we get these terms confused and we think about, some of the great innovators of history, Thomas Edison, whatever, as having invented great and beautiful and amazing and wonderful things. That was sort of the old way of thinking about innovation. The old way to think about innovation was to focus on invention. And people would go into the lab, and people would go into the research university, and people would, go into, their basements and their garages, and they would try to invent new things to try to change the world. Well, it turns out if you really dive into what causes successful companies, it's not about inventing, it is about innovating. And so let me sort of dive into a little bit the difference between invention and innovation. So let's think about some of the world-changing inventions of the last 70 years, right? So you look at all of these world-changing inventions and you think to yourself, yeah, boy, these things have made life amazingly better and amazingly nicer. And then you look at the most successful tech companies in the world, or the most successful tech companies in Silicon Valley. And you think, wait a second, what is it that they invented? You look at these inventions and you say, boy, hardly anything was actually invented in Silicon Valley. Isn't that amazing? I mean, you look at these inventions, it's hard to find anything here that was invented in Silicon Valley. I can think of two things, actually. So it turns out Intel did indeed invent the microprocessor. God bless them. And Cisco did indeed invent the router. But what did Apple invent, right? What did Apple invent? Apple did not invent the microcomputer. They didn't invent the mouse. They didn't invent the GUI interface. Apple did not invent the MP3 player. Apple didn't invent the smartphone. They didn't invent the tablet. What did Apple invent? What did Google invent? Google didn't invent search. What did Google invent? What did Netflix invent? What did Facebook invent? What did Oracle invent? What did these companies invent? Well, they didn't invent anything. The secret is not to focus on inventing new technology. The secret is to figure out how to take all of the inventions all over the planet, put them together in a novel way, and build a successful company. So think about it. What is innovation? Innovation is the novel commercialization of ideas, new or old. So if you're focused on innovation, don't focus on trying to invent something new. Open your eyes to what's going on around the world. Look at all the creative insights that people have had, the new technologies that are emerging, the new business models that are being developed. Figure out a way that you can go attack some opportunity out there by putting together these technologies and these business models, creating a new company, commercializing, and then becoming successful. So lesson number one is it's not about invention, it's about innovation. And innovation is different than invention. Lesson number two has to do with the variation on this, which is the way corporate R&D historically has been done. Historically, corporate R&D was done as this protected internal process. We would hire, scores of PhDs, and we would stick them in the basement and close the doors, and we would ask them to develop new technology and keep it all very much secret and hush-hush, and then turn that into products and then launch those products. And that was sort of the 20th century model of corporate innovation. But what we have learned is that the right way to accelerate innovation, to be successful with innovation, is global open innovation. So open innovation is a term that was coined here, actually at Berkeley, by a professor at Berkeley, but it was invented, I say, it was invented in Silicon Valley by John Chambers at Cisco. And what John Chambers realized back in the 80s, he got up in front of his team and he said, hey guys, we got a whole bunch of really, really smart people here, some of the smartest people in the world. But, we don't have all the smart people in the world here at Cisco. So why don't we take advantage of all the smart people in the world, and let's go reach out to find brilliant entrepreneurs, brilliant engineers, brilliant scientists who've come up with really interesting technologies and other innovations that we can incorporate into our company. Many years later, Hank Chesbrough at Berkeley coined the term open innovation to identify this transition in the approach to corporate R&D that said, stop spending your money on PhDs in the basement. Spend your money on reaching out to entrepreneurs in the world that have got emerging technologies that are relevant to your particular company. That's the new idea for corporate open innovation. Lesson number three has to do with corporate culture. So historically, we think of sort of this traditional corporate model as being this top-down architecture where what you do is either you tell everybody how we're going to get things done, or what you say is, okay, everybody, you agree with me, right? right? Okay, we have consensus here. That turns out to be the fastest way to calcify your organization. The fastest way to turn your corporation into a dinosaur is to have a top-down, consensus-based decision-making process that crushes dissent and tries to force everybody to agree with the senior C-suite officers of the company. What we have learned in Silicon Valley is that, in fact, what you want to do is cultivate divergent thinking in your organization. Now, this is scary to most traditional managers, to most traditional corporate types. But let me explain this in the form of a parable. The parable of the optimist, the pessimist, and the engineer. So you've all heard some part of this before, I think, right? So the optimist is the person who looks at this glass and says, this glass is half full. And the pessimist looks at the same glass and says, no, that glass is half empty. And the engineer looks at the same glass and says, this glass was engineered to be twice as big as it needs to be. So the point of the story is the same set of facts, but three different perspectives. Now, what you want in your organization is you want this diversity of perspectives. You want people who can see the world in different ways, because no one of us has a monopoly on understanding the way the world works. So you want to hire people who have these different perspectives and bring them to the table and listen to them. Now, what happens if you have a bunch of people with different perspectives and you're trying to solve a problem inside your organization? What do you think happens? You start getting fights, right? And so when I was an entrepreneur, I thought the whole idea of being an entrepreneur was that we all had this shared vision and we all locked arms together and we all marched forward into this beautiful future singing Kumbaya. And so when we would start fighting around the conference table, I thought, no, something's wrong. Something bad is happening. But I was wrong. It turns out when you are fighting around the conference table, it's a good thing. It means you have a bunch of really smart people who are passionate about getting it right and will not shut up until they make sure that they are heard. Now, the challenge, obviously, is how do you get the team of different perspectives to come together and then march forward in alignment? And this has to do with corporate culture. This has to do with creating a culture that is willing to mine or cultivate these different perspectives, these diverse perspectives. Listen to everybody and then say to everybody, okay, great, we've listened to everybody. We have these different points of view. Here's a way we reconcile this, and here's how we go forward. We're going to test this and then go from there. And the idea is you allow people to disagree, but then you get them to say, okay, I am committed to this pathway. You've got to get them to disagree, then commit. If they don't commit, if they sabotage the result, then you kick them off the bus. You've got to be willing to say, my perspective was heard, and I understand we chose a different direction, so I am going to support that different direction. That is a company culture thing that you've got to cultivate. It's not easy, but if you don't, the alternative is to have a top-down model where some senior person says, I know what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you what to do. Just do what I tell you to do and shut up. You'll lose all your good people that way. So you don't want to lose your good people. You want to cultivate them. So that's lesson number 3, is making sure that you cultivate divergent thinking. Lesson number 4 has to do with leadership. Leadership is another one of those terms that we talk about incessantly. We talk about leadership, but nobody really knows the answer to leadership. There are a bazillion of books on leadership. They all say sort of the same thing, but everybody has something different to say. Traditionally, the way we thought about leadership was that you have leaders at the top and then the leaders hire followers, right? But you don't want that kind of organization. What you want to do is you want to build an organization where leaders hire leaders. Now, that seems a little crazy because if everybody's leading, who's getting the work done, right? But think about it. What makes for a good leader? Now, I wish we were in a room together and I could call on names and I could ask you, okay, what do you think makes a good leader? What do you think makes a good leader? Generally, if we were all in the same room, we were all talking, what we would find is, if you ask 20 people what makes a good leader, you'll probably come up with 20 different descriptions of what makes a good leader. And they're all right. They're all right. Good leaders, they set goals, they listen, they inspire, they make decisions, they have integrity, they show humility. Good leaders do all these things. Look at this list and think of everything you think of with a good leader. Why would you hire someone different? Why would you hire a follower who's only good for just waiting until you tell them what to do and then maybe, hopefully, getting it done? No, you want leaders who take responsibility and accountability for getting things done, for solving problems, for making decisions at the edge. If you don't have leaders making decisions at the edge and everything bubbles back into the C-suite, you're going to paralyze the company and you can never scale your company. So you want good leaders to take leadership at the edge. Lesson number 5 has to do with the competitive strategy of a company. So traditionally, we were all raised in a capitalistic society. We were raised to believe that it's we win and you lose. It's a zero-sum game, and I am going to crush the competition. And that's kind of what the American business school training was all about. How do you crush the competition? Well, what we've learned in Silicon Valley is that it's not so much about crushing the competition as figuring out how we win and you win. How do you build a collaborative ecosystem where all boats rise? And so that's one of the models that has been particularly powerful in Silicon Valley, is an ecosystem model of collaboration. And there are a lot of ways to collaborate with your competition and in a way that everybody wins. You can collaborate by setting standards, by creating a standards environment such that everybody in the marketplace can adopt this new technology, and you can accelerate the penetration of a new technology into the marketplace by collaborating around standards. You can collaborate around marketing. So new technologies may require an education to get the market to adopt them. Collaborate around educating the market, creating trade shows and conferences and other approaches, so that the marketplace knows about the new technology, understands the value of the new technology, and understands how they can use it. And you can collaborate around platforms. And you think Amazon was traditionally not a platform; they were an e-commerce site. They sold things. They bought things and they sold things. Then they turned it, in order to scale, they had to turn it into a platform. So they allowed competition, i.e., other retailers, to sell on their platform. Obviously, Apple and Google and a lot of examples of very, very successful platform collaboration models. Lesson number 6 has to do with your attitude toward failure. So again, in most cultures around the world, the traditional attitude toward failure is not an option. The challenge in every corporation is corporations have this model that says, we have this pyramid structure at the bottom. We hire a whole bunch of young people out of university and we throw them at the problem, right? And what we do is the junior people who make mistakes, we fire them. And the ones that don't make mistakes, we promote them. And then the next level up, you make a mistake, you're out. You don't make a mistake, you get promoted. And so what do you teach? You teach a culture that says, don't make a mistake. And so you create a culture of aversion to risk, aversion to take chances. But what we've learned in Silicon Valley is that, in fact, failure is a necessity. Failure is the way you learn. If you don't try a bunch of things, you're not going to understand what works and what doesn't work. And so what we've learned, as in the entrepreneur ecosystem, is you've got to give people the permission to try a whole bunch of things, to experiment, knowing that most things are not going to work. The reality is most things aren't going to work, but if you fire everybody who tries something that doesn't work, you're not going to have any talent left over. So what you want to do is make sure that you allow people to take shots. If you take a shot, you might miss, but as a famous quote goes, You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So if you don't try, you're not going to learn. If you don't try, you're not going to discover some amazing novel way of getting things done, some amazing hack that enables you to grow or grab a market that would not have been obvious if you didn't take the risk of trying something different. So again, frequently failure is the best way to learn. This is one of my favorite examples. So we're investors in SpaceX, and this is a test launch just several months ago at SpaceX. And that looks like, oh my God, that must be a bad thing. The rocket, in fact, blew up shortly after takeoff. So the reality is that was intentional. They intentionally blew up a rocket after takeoff to see what the failure systems, how the failure systems work. They wanted to make sure that if there was an astronaut in a capsule on top of a rocket that blew up, that those astronauts could be safe. And so failure was a way to learn. Inducing an explosion intentionally to see if the safety systems worked was their best way to prove that no matter what happens, our astronauts are going to be safe. Lesson number 7, and I know we're running long here. I'm going to try to wrap this up quickly so you all have an opportunity to listen to Ari. So lesson number 7 has to do with perceived constraints. So, all of us in business, we know there are constraints on our operations. And traditionally, sort of in a sort of macroeconomic, traditional economics way of thinking, we are taught to assume increasing scarcity, right? So over time, as you scale, there are limited new markets, there's limited additional capital, there's limited additional labor and, raw materials, et cetera, The traditional economic model, the traditional corporate model of the 20th century assumed increasing scarcity. But what we learned in the digital age is in a digital world, you can assume increasing abundance. This is the beauty of Moore's law. It's the beauty of the fact that over time, bandwidth and storage and compute all increase at the same price. And so if you're in a digital world, you shouldn't be assuming increasing scarcity. You shouldn't use the old traditional models of economic capital and labor and resources. You have to assume increasing abundance. That means you design for an increasingly abundant world, not an increasingly scarce world. So what does that mean in practice? In practice, it means if you have a mindset of scarcity, then what you're going to do is you're going to design a cheaper Nokia phone, right? Because we got the first generation of phones out and affluent people could buy them and afford them. And so now what do? We make a cheap phone so that less affluent people can buy them. Makes sense, right? With a mindset of scarcity. If you have a mindset of abundance, though, what do? You design an insanely expensive Apple iPhone because you know that next year there are going to be more people on the network. The bandwidth is going to be faster. The bandwidth's going to be cheaper. The storage is going to be cheaper. There are going to be more apps. There are going to be more uses for the phone. It's going to be more and more valuable as time goes on because of this mindset of abundance, because of the nature of the digital world. So the lesson is design for abundance, don't design for scarcity. Lesson number 8 has to do with the role of ecosystem stakeholders. For all of you in the Philippines ecosystem and in different ecosystems around the world, I think we have a pretty international crowd here, right? Traditionally, with all due respect to the director, God bless, government drives the ecosystem. Around the world, governments have been incredibly important and valuable in driving the innovation ecosystem, in enabling entrepreneurs to have a chance to survive and thrive. And so traditionally, it's been government that has enabled the beginnings of healthy ecosystems. But what we learned in Silicon Valley and what is particularly powerful is when corporations and the private sector get involved. And in fact, when you get corporations driving the ecosystem, when you get the corporations in the ecosystem saying, hey, let's try this new technology. Let's support this startup company. Let's support this entrepreneur. Let's look at this emerging technology and how it might be strategically valuable for us. Everybody wins. Everybody wins when you get all of the stakeholders involved in supporting the innovation ecosystem. Lesson number 9 has to do with the globalization of innovation. So again, traditionally, and this is the arrogant Silicon Valley mindset from years ago. The Silicon Valley mindset was, Silicon Valley, we're the ones who innovate, and the rest of the world, they copy. But what has happened with the globalization of innovation is the reality today is that everybody innovates and everybody copies, right? So that's okay. We cast the net globally, looking for emerging brilliant entrepreneurs who've come up with innovations that we can tap for our portfolio, for our limited partners, for our investors. That's why we're looking around the world and playing around the world to try to tap into all of the ecosystems all over the planet. And it's okay to copy. This is my point from the beginning. Lesson number 1, innovation is about the commercialization of ideas new and old. Doesn't have to be a new idea. You can borrow it from somebody else. You look at Google. Google did not invent the core technologies they were based on. Google borrowed from other people. It's a longer discussion. Love to have that discussion, but we don't have time. So, and lesson 10, last lesson has to do with the role of technology in innovation. Traditionally, particularly here in Silicon Valley, but in all sort of engineering, corporate R&D oriented situations, the mindset was always technology drives innovation, right? So new technology, that's what makes for innovation. But what we've learned, and we learned it the hard way. A lot of people learned it the hard way here in Silicon Valley. Technology is important. Technology is key, obviously, but it's not the driver. The reality is that people drive innovation, right? Of course, right? Because it's your customer that decides whether or not they're going to buy your product. And one of the things I learned, as a lad, when I was an entrepreneur, a young lad in Silicon Valley, is that, the reality of business is that people don't buy products, people buy benefits. And so if you're sitting there thinking, oh, wow, my product is just the greatest, coolest, sexiest, novelist, most amazing technological innovation, that's not what people want. What people want is the value your product creates. It's the benefit of your product. We should stop spending our time focused on our products and focus on our customers, focus on the people and the benefits, the value we're delivering to people. But this is true not just about our customers, it's true about our whole set of stakeholders. It's true about our partners, it's true about our employees. So what you want to do is make sure, particularly with your employees, but also with your customers, also with your partners, is you want to tap the power of enthusiasm. Human enthusiasm, the enthusiasm of people, is so much more powerful than the power of technology. The power of enthusiasm is what makes things happen. And as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, 150 years ago, nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. So if you want to achieve greatness, it's about tapping the power of enthusiasm, the enthusiasm in your people, the enthusiasm in your customers. Provide them with innovation that delivers value, that causes them to fall in love with what you're doing, fall in love with your vision. And that's what drives success in the world. So with that, the new innovation paradigm is focus on innovation, not invention. Invest in open innovation, embrace diverse teams, and tap creative conflict. Build a team of leaders, not a team of followers. Win through collaboration. Don't punish failure, encourage experimentation. Design for increasing abundance, engage industry, get government out of the way. It's okay to copy, and remember, people drive success, not technology. So I'm happy to share these slides. I'm not sure how we're going to do that. I know we're running a little bit late. I want to get Ari on stage. I wish we had time for Q&A. I don't think we do, but here's how you can all reach me. If you want a copy of the slides, bill@pegasusventures.com, or you can direct message me on Twitter at Bill Reichert. So I'm delighted to be here. I wish we had more time, but with that, I will ask, what do we do next? So I don't know, RJ, are you gonna come in and say goodbye? Can't hear you, RJ, you're mute. Okay.
Really fantastic presentation. I was taking copious amounts of notes over here. And it's really mind-blowing what you're giving, a lot of things which many people find counterintuitive at first, but many of the lessons are coming out of your actual experience in Silicon Valley. So we're all very appreciative. If you don't mind, can you tell us a bit more about with Pegasus Ventures right now, and you investing in companies all over the world and startups all over the world? What are you seeing right now, particularly in terms of the trends and opportunities that are coming up? What are you investing in right now? We're just curious to see where do you see things moving next in terms of startup technology and trends?
No, sure. Happy to address that. I mean, obviously, with this whole COVID thing, it has affected the balance of innovation in the world. And so we've seen, a bunch of companies that got whacked by COVID, a lot in the hospitality, small business, travel, unfortunately. I mean, that'll come back someday. And so, but for the most part, the venture world is saying, okay, cross your fingers, hope they survive. Let's wait for that to sort out. On the other side, COVID has absolutely driven a whole bunch of trends that were already started and now have been accelerated. The most obvious one is in health tech, and sort of all of the tools around discovery of new drugs, discovery of new therapies, med tech that is to monitor and to predict health indications, and sort of that whole ecosystem, the whole telehealth side of medicine, all of that has just exploded. And then sort of less obvious but significant is the whole logistics of the planet has been transformed. At the micro level, the last mile level, now everybody wants it delivered. They don't want to have to go out and get it, right? That happened before COVID, but now that's been accelerated. And now we're traveling around the world digitally, right? Rather than getting on airplanes. That happened before COVID, but that's been accelerated. So but other than, sort of those asymmetries and the impact of COVID, which, will wind down at some point, the question we always get is what's the next big thing? And the beautiful reality of this world right now is that pretty much everything is trending. It's really hard to think of any part of the world that isn't open to innovation now. Right? So we have ed tech, and we have ag tech, and we have food tech, and we have reg tech, and we have fem tech, and we have a gov tech, and we have insure tech, right? We got tech everything, right? And we have smart cities, and we have smart homes, and we have smart buildings, and everything's getting smart. We have Industry 4.0 and AI and robotics and smart manufacturing, and IoT and IoE. And we've got space technology. Space is opening up. I mean, so it's just, you don't have to figure out what the next big thing is. There are literally hundreds of next big things that you can go after. And that's just the beauty of being an entrepreneur in this current day and age. There are so many problems that we can now solve at the entrepreneur level, sort of across our lives, that, boy, we just need more entrepreneurs to come up with more of these innovations to make our world a better place.
And talking about making our world a better place, Bill, I'd like to jump off from that. Usually, there's a certain dichotomy when it comes to, solving problems which are quote unquote first world problems and solving problems which are developing country concerns.
Absolutely.
Have you seen right now, particularly from your bigger perspective,
Yeah.
is it more beneficial, or is there advantage of solving first world problems, and does it trickle down to the developing country, or are there specific tech or startups or investments that you can make which will really make a big impact in developing countries because it solves developing country issues?
Yeah, I mean, again, depending on where you are as an entrepreneur, that is almost certainly going to frame the opportunity you want to exploit, right? And so to say that, ride sharing is somehow a bigger, more interesting problem in the developed world than it is in the developing world is crazy, right? So you need ride sharing in every market, but the way you do it in the developing world is different than the way you do it in the in the developed world. So that's the great thing about local entrepreneurship. The brief story, famous example for me. So it relates to the Startup World Cup. So you guys have been involved with the Startup World Cup. I have the honor of being the chief evangelist for the Startup World Cup. And so the Startup World Cup this year is going to have competitions in 60 regions around the world, 60 different regions on every continent. And so it's become a huge, wonderful global opportunity. Last year, the winner of the Startup World Cup was from Southeast Asia, happened to be from Vietnam. And it was a company that had developed logistics optimization software for Vietnam. And the entrepreneur is on stage, the grand finale, huge hall, thousands of people listening. She's pitching her company. It's a company called Abivin. Shout out to Abivin. So she's pitching Abivin, and one of the judges, super smart VC investor from IBM, says, okay, but why can't any logistics company with software come into Vietnam and just take away your business? And she did not blink. She looked at them and said, because they don't know Vietnam. They don't understand. You can't drive a truck down every road. You can't drive a motorbike across every highway. And what she said was, we get our market. We understand our market in the way that some stupid big company from another part of the planet is not going to understand. And the judges all went, whoa, this lady has got this nailed. And she won the grand prize, a $1 million prize, because she just nailed it in the Q&A session. So the point is, you can be successful in any market as long as you understand how the innovation, the business model, and the local requirements all fit together. And that's something that requires that you be local, that you really understand your market. You can't pretend from one part of the world that you're going to be successful in another part of the world.
I love that. Innovation, business model, and local requirement. And those are the three, I think those are the three key things really moving forward for innovation. Bill, we've got one more question from the audience, and I wanted to ask the same question as well.
Sure.
I worked for a multinational many years ago, and the multinational's sort of like unspoken rule was that it's up or out. You make a mistake, you're out. You're kicked out of the organization if you fail. So
Exactly.
for you, is there a systematic way for an organization to build into its DNA that you're allowed to fail, and you put in the budget, you put it in the P&L? How do you make sure that there's a way to make sure it's part of the system?
Yeah, absolutely. So a number of companies here in the Valley have implemented various models for this. Google is one of them, and the point is, there are times when you don't know the answer, right? So you're trying to solve a problem. I don't know, exactly what size widget is the right widget for the market, or I don't know exactly what price is right, whatever. There's all sorts of business problems for which you do not yet know the answer, and you have to go figure out what the answer is. Now, traditionally, people would sort of hire a consulting firm and do market research and ask the customers and collect the data. And traditionally, what we've learned is that is frequently wrong. Steve Jobs was famous for saying, if you ask customers, they can't tell you what they really want. And this was true. This goes back to Henry Ford, said essentially the same thing. If you ask people what they want in terms of transportation, they'd say, I want a faster horse, right? So you can't, it's really hard to do, that kind of market research. The point is, you got to go try stuff. And so there are times in your product market, development where you say, we don't know. So, okay, let's try 4 different things and see what works. Guess what? I know you're not all going to be successful. That's okay. We want real good data from this experiment. So, you take your best shot. I know there's a chance you're not going to win, but what I want to see is that you're really good at learning. That's what we want to see. So it's not about trying and failing. It's about trying and learning and building that into the system. So there are times when, as an organization, you realize we don't know the answer, so we got to try and learn. There are other times, obviously, there are other times when people have a responsibility to get things done, and they should get things done. Presumably, they have the skills and the resources and the time to get them done, and so that's a different kind of failure. If you have the skills and the resources and the time to get something done that you're supposed to get done, you got to be accountable and responsible for that. That's fine. So accountability and responsibility is important, but in some situations, it's not about getting necessarily succeeding. It's about learning, and that's kind of the difference in the mindset that you got to have in the organization. So Google and the Google X group, what they do is they have this sort of this continuous review process where they look at the experiments and they say, are we learning from this experiment? Are we learning? Are we learning? Are we learning? They're not saying, will it succeed? Will it succeed? Will it succeed? They're saying, are we learning? Are we learning? Are we learning? Now, obviously, you want to be on the path to success, but at some point you say, we're not learning and it doesn't look like it's going to succeed. So team, let's celebrate what we learned. And you shut down the operation and you have a celebration and you say, now we have all these smart people, we can deploy them onto something else. You don't fire them. You've taught them how to learn. So take advantage of that teaching and enable them to learn more for your organization. Don't fire them.
So again, failure is an investment in learning. That's really
exactly. Great.
Thanks so much.
Let's put that on the wall. Let's put it on the wall.
Failure is an investment in learning. Again, Bill, thanks so much. I personally learned so much. I guess the rest of Ignite 2020 attendees learned so much. Hopefully, next year, when you're able to invest in a company that discovers the cure for COVID 100%, we will see you back here in the Philippines. Thank you so much, Bill.
Okay.
Have a good evening. Bill Reichert of Pegasus Ventures, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us, Bill.
My pleasure. Okay. Have a great event. Okay.
Thanks. And you're welcome to listen to Ari as our next speaker as well.